as you might imagine, plenty of people with plenty of opinions on this. We're going to head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
It is Rico. This hurts my soul as a sports fan watching our Cleveland Browns. I don't want to hear about curses because look at the Lions. They've broken that so-called curse. A sign of a good organization is being consistent, and it looks like they found that consistency. I don't want to fire a coach and a GM every few years. I'm tired of that. I really was hoping to keep those two on board for the next decade. But if the players quit on him, then you can't bring him back. And as far as Andrew Berry goes, I don't know if I trust him making these next crucial draft picks. I think we need a blue-collar, hard-nosed, no-nonsense approach coach. And we have one in the building in Mike Vrabel. I don't know if he's going to be the one to take us over the hump, but I really do think that's who we need. And not only do we have trouble drafting a franchise quarterback, we can't even buy a franchise quarterback. It's just downright awful, and I'm sick of it.
Yeah, I can't argue with that assessment, and I think Rico's absolutely right. You got to see how the players respond to Kevin Stefanski. Relative to Andrew Berry and a new GM, Spencer, who's going to want to come in with the salary cap situation being like it is? Andrew Berry appears to have a plan where it kind of mitigates it. We'll see. But this team was supposed to contend for an AFC title this year. In my mind, and a lot of people's minds, they're contending for the first pick in the draft. That's not good.
Yeah, and I do think that's why ultimately, like, somebody gets the blame here at the end of the season. And I think your point is really valid. Where if the team quits on Stefanski, maybe it ends up being him, or maybe he becomes part of that equation or part of the changes that they make. I said that a couple of years ago in 2021. People were clamoring for Kevin Stefanski to be fired. And I kind of put it in the hands of like, okay, well, if the players keep playing hard the rest of the season, maybe that, mitigates some of the problems and makes you believe that he can still sort of be here and should be here. And that was the case that year. We'll see how the next 7 games go. 7 games feels like an eternity for this team, given how each week just feels like you're trotting out there to watch the same sort of just miserable experience over and over again. And eventually maybe that boils over and players do quit. But I don't know. I think Kevin Stefanski is still the right. The way I've been putting it is like I still think Kevin Stefanski can be part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. When you think about and I think the Andrew Berry part of this is the bigger factor here. Like that the caller said, he doesn't necessarily know if he trusts Andrew Berry to make these key draft picks for the organization, particularly when it comes to maybe selecting a quarterback. And I think there's some validity in that. I think like you look at this roster, we were sort of sold on the idea that this group was going to be really good. They were running it back from last year, and they put their stock in that, and they've kicked so much money down the road with some of these guys, and now it's just kind of this albatross and this mess. And somebody I think does get blamed for that, and I think the person that largely you would point at is Andrew Berry. I know there's context as to why some of his picks haven't worked out, but I mean, at the end of the day, like the NFL is a pretty cutthroat business. Like the results need to be there, and you're going to get judged off of, as a GM, especially like the guys that you draft in particular, and then the signings that you make. And some of his biggest signings haven't necessarily worked out. The biggest one, or the biggest trade, I guess, being, Deshaun Watson. And a lot of his draft picks haven't necessarily come to the forefront and been solid players for this team. There's some that certainly stand out in our minds. But there's been a lot of misses in there as well. And I understand like he was drafted in later rounds, but I do think too that when you make the trade you made for Deshaun Watson, you're banking on your staff like being able to nail a lot of those picks and sort of still be able to sort of mitigate the lack of first and second round picks that you have. And they just haven't been able to do that. So again, maybe it's not totally fair if he gets fully blamed for all this, especially when they continue to say that it's been a team effort and they've all kind of been on the same page with these decisions. But I do think somebody ends up sort of paying the price for this, and it feels more like it's going to fall on Andrew Berry's lap than it would Kevin Stefanski. That's my read on the situation. I could end up being wrong. I also think there's a side of this where if you fire one, what is the point of keeping the other? Because depending on how you hire that next GM, is Kevin Stefanski just going to go into a lame duck season anyway? Now, it's worth noting Stefanski was hired before Barry when in 2020, and so he clearly had some say in choosing Andrew Barry to come here, and maybe they would go through that process again and find another good pairing for Stefanski and somebody he can be in lockstep with. But I do think that's another interesting part of this as well is, you know, can they find the right match if Stefanski does stick around, or is it just going to be a guy who comes in and wants to hire his own coach?